and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast Series. My name's Jeff Berman. I'm Group News Editor for Logistics Management Magazine and the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a big pleasure to welcome back Ian Jefferies to our podcast. Ian serves as President and CEO of the Association of American Railroads down in Washington, D.C. Ian started in his role leading the AAR back in January 2019, and prior to that, he served as a senior vice president of AAR's government affairs, overseeing the development, promotion, and implementation of legislative priorities for the AAR. And before joining AAR, Ian served as a senior policy advisor to the chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation from 2009 to 2013. Ian, welcome back.
Hey, good morning. How are you, Jeff? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. It's great to have you and doing well. By my count, Ian, this is at least the fourth or fifth time you've joined us for a podcast. So we really appreciate that. I'd have to say you're probably leading the pack in terms of appearances. So thanks for that.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's always good to catch up, and certainly no shortage of things to talk about today, right?
No, none at all. And good place to start, I thought, would just be looking, now that we're officially through Q1 and into early April, I just thought it'd be good, maybe, Ian, to get your take on sort of the current state of rail carload and intermodal volumes on a year-to-date basis. And specifically, obviously, we're talking about U.S. and North America. What's kind of happening? What are some of your observations based on what the numbers are telling us?
Yeah, so if we take a look back at the first quarter, I think, it's kind of probably about what people expected to see. I think kind of some ups and downs, a little, the economy's got some uncertainty going on still, and certainly economic indicators are varied, and rail traffic reflects that. There's positives. Autos are continuing to do well. I think we're about up about 10% for the year over year to date. I was just reading an article this morning talking about how cars are moving off the lots at a quicker clip now, because there's finally some inventory returning to auto dealers. So hopefully that's a sign of things to continue. I guess we'll see how the consumer feels for the rest of the year when it comes to that. But other commodities, we're just kind of trudging along. Coal is about exactly where it was at this point last year.
Right.
So doing okay. Grain's off a bit. Other ag products are doing okay. So it's just kind of a mixed bag. Crushed stone, sand, gravel's doing pretty well. But then we look over at intermodal, and intermodal's not where we probably want it to be. We're off about 10% year to date where we were first quarter last year. But at the same time, I don't think that's an overwhelming surprise when we look at the decrease in imports, the decrease in port traffic that's going on right now. So we'll see how the rest of the year goes. I think just based on who you talk to or who you listen to, or certainly reading Jamie Dimon's annual letter. There's some pretty thoughtful people out there who think that it might be a little bit of a bumpy ride, but the economy is going to do okay by the time it's all said and done. So we'll be there ready to play our part with our customers and serving communities.
Right, absolutely. So shifting from volumes, let's take a step over to service. Are we at a point, are we getting to a point where perhaps railroads can put their service woes behind them and potentially win more market share from the trucking sector?
Well, when you look at the major metrics, there's definitely year-over-year improvements. And of course, winter's always a wild card depending on where you are in the country, and certainly hasn't spared portions of the country even in the recent weeks. Just some of the snow volumes is quite frankly unbelievable out in portions of the West. But rail continues to work through that. And I think we've demonstrated a decent level of resiliency here in the past few months. And even as early as I think it was mid last fall, the STB recognized that in some of its service reporting. And while they extended the the service metric reporting, I believe until maybe end of May. They did say that they had seen good progress, and so I think the rails are continuing to work hard. We're hiring, continue to hire across the board. At this point, we have our largest employee base in over 3 years, so we've been
Okay.
able to. I think it's no secret, kind of got caught short there coming out of the pandemic with a dramatic traffic uptick, and been working over the last year and a half to get right size there. Still some work to do in various pockets of the country, but I think you're seeing the service metrics improve as a result of that. And so to your question, as far as adding more traffic, stealing traffic, competing for traffic, maybe we weren't in a position to do before. I think that's absolutely the case. You're hearing that from the executives across the industry, and that's the goal, and they know what they need to do it. And I think the opportunity's there. The challenges in our competitor industries are persistent, and railroads. Let's keep improving service. Let's provide predictable service. Let's increase customer visibility into their shipments. Let's make sure we're right sized on the headcount side of things, with a little bit of resiliency built in. And I think the opportunities will come, and we're excited to compete for them.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And let's turn to railroad safety. Obviously, it's been a major topic of late, especially in the mainstream media. The U.S. railroads all recently issued safety-related statistics, and just want to get your take on, really, what was the objective in doing so, and part two, what were the key takeaways of that?
Sure, and you're spot on. Rail safety has been front and center in the spotlight here throughout the first quarter, and we all know that that's driven out of the result of the incident in East Palestine, which became a pretty high profile incident. And unfortunately, I've had a few others that have maybe gotten a little more news than they otherwise normally would.
Right.
But at the same time, the FRA put out its 2022 safety stats in March of 23, so just last month. And when you take a step back and look at safety performance throughout the industry, the numbers are actually very encouraging. When you look at mainline accident rate, for example, it's at the lowest it's ever been. In 2022 is the lowest it has ever been in the industry's entire history. And that's down 49% in the past 20 years or so.
Okay.
So a pretty dramatic improvement. Derailment rates generally down. It is been up a little year over year. That's largely driven by incidents in yards. Track caused, lowest it's ever been. Employee casualty rate, which is obviously front and center for everything we're doing. We want our employees to be safe. 2022 is at an all-time low, but then I guess I should also add, just because it's been such a focus, and rightfully so, the hazmat accident rate. Hazmat accident rate last year was actually the lowest it's ever been as well. But that's not enough, and we recognize that. And as long as we're having incidents, we've got to keep taking steps to drive that number down. And just being fully transparent, not every category of accidents was down, so we've got to keep our shoulders into that. And I think that's what you're seeing. And policymakers certainly recognize the need for continuous improvement, but also recognize the need that rail is by far the safest way to move goods across land. And so we're at the same time, proud of our safety record and continue to be proud of it. But we're not satisfied. We've got more work to do, and that's a never-ending process.
Right. 100%. There's been this sort of narrative in certain places that the AAR perhaps opposes safety or lobbies to prevent safety related measures. Can you just address that? Obviously there's plenty to address on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thank you for asking it, quite honestly, because it couldn't be further from the truth. This industry, and the AAR in particular, has a long history of supporting smart safety measures with demonstrable safety benefits. We have a long history of not waiting for the regulator or waiting for Congress to take safety steps when needed. Even go back to 2011, 2012, we were petitioning for stronger tank car standards over at the DOT a couple years before they got around to doing it. And instead of waiting, we were able to get agreement with several of our shipper groups to go ahead and adopt new voluntary standards. And the tank car standards that are in place today are largely a result of our petition and the work that we did on the front end. So our track record is strong. There's been a lot of talk about wayside detection recently, hot box detectors, acoustic wheel bearing detectors. Well, those are all deployed, and those are all out on the network because of the voluntary decisions we made, because of the safety benefits they have. There's not a regulatory regime around those, and so we are absolutely pushing ahead without waiting when safety improvements can be made. At the same time, we certainly support appropriate regulatory responses. We certainly support appropriate legislative responses. And there's going to be things we agree on. There's going to be things we disagree on. But we're driven by data. We're driven by science. And when the data shows that a particular step is going to result in a higher level of safety, we're 100% going to be behind that.
Okay, great. And just a couple more quick safety related questions, Ian. So how do you sort of view the policy discussion now, perhaps separately as it pertains first to the United States Department of Transportation and then secondly, Congress?
Yeah, so those are two kind of separate questions. And one, apologies for the siren in the background a minute ago.
No problem.
But, DOT, I think is, here we go again. I don't know what's going on out there, but DOT, I think it's certainly no surprise that it is going to focus on steps it might need to take in areas where perhaps it has overlooked, and certainly we want to be partners there. Believe it or not, there's still requirements out of the FAST Act, which was the infrastructure bill in 2015, that DOT has yet to complete, and so I think they're probably looking at what they need to do on that front when it comes to some notification issues and emergency responders. But I think it's natural, given the spotlight on rail safety matters, for the DOT to be taking a look at what its regulatory regime looks like. Now, we'll be very active in that, because we want to make sure that any steps they do take are, one, grounded in data, and two, really focused on taking the railroad forward versus looking backward or locking in the way we do things today, because innovation and deployment testing of new technologies is the way we're going to keep taking safety forward. And that's why you have the regulatory process you have, right? That encourages stakeholder participation. That's why the APA process is what it is, because it's a deliberative process that should involve stakeholder participation. And at the FRA in particular, there's something called the Rail Safety Advisory Committee, which is made up of stakeholders from railroads, from suppliers, from shippers, from rail labor, and the FRA will convene this group and say, we're interested in looking at how we should best tackle this issue. And the group sits around, shares perspectives, and the goal is to really try to get a path forward that everybody makes sense, or everybody thinks makes sense. So to me, that's a good way of doing business. And it doesn't always succeed, but if you can get everybody supporting something on the front end, it typically results in a better outcome on the back end. On the legislative side, I certainly understand the need for the Ohio delegation in particular, and their desire to do legislation. They want to be responsive. They want to take responsible steps to reduce the likelihood of a similar incident occurring again. And I certainly do not fault them for that, and credit them for their interest. They've introduced legislation that will be working its way through the Senate Commerce Committee. I think, I testified week before last in the Senate Commerce Committee, and I said publicly that I think we see a feasible path forward on almost every one of the provisions in the bills. And of course, my definition of feasible might be different than others' definition of feasible, but right. I generally think there's an agreeable path forward on most things. There's going to be some areas where we just have to draw a line in the sand, and that may be the way it has to be. But I'm a solutions oriented person, and I I want AAR to be a solutions oriented organization, and if there's smart things to do on safety, we're going to be right there supporting and trying to be part of the solution. So it's nothing happens in a vacuum and nothing happens overnight, but
Yeah.
we'll be engaged throughout the process.
Okay. All right. Great. And then just the last, safety related question we have, just from the perspective of your members, the railroad carriers, that is, what specific actions are, or I guess safety related actions are they taking or considering at this point or moving forward?
So we've done a number of things actually in a pretty short amount of time. So the incident in East Palestine, I think it's been well documented that while the NTSB is doing its investigation, we know that an overheated wheel based on a hot wheel bearing was one of the contributing factors, and that was identified by a hot box detector out on the network. But we really did an industry-wide analysis and identified some gaps, and so the industry committed to really shrinking the average distance between hot box detectors across the national network, which is going to result in roughly 1,000 additional detectors being put out on the network across the different roads. We also came to a new industry standard to reduce the absolute temperature threshold that would result in an alarm and a train being stopped. And we're also really digging deep into various trending analyses and predictive analytics that each of the rails use, and looking at how we can best adopt industry best practices as an industry standard. So that's really focused again on the detector side of things. We're redoubling efforts to make sure we're getting the right information out to emergency responders. We'll train about 22,000 emergency responders across the country this year alone. That's something we do every year. It's really important to make sure we're preparing emergency responders in the unlikely event that there might be an incident for how to respond to something, and that they know who to contact, they know what the appropriate response procedures are. That's really part of we bucket safety into, I call it a three-legged stool. It's prevention, it's mitigation, it's response. So prevention is making sure you don't have an incident. Obviously, that's where the detectors piece of this is. Mitigation is really if there is an incident, how do we minimize the impact? And that's where we're really thinking about tank car standards, working with our customers to make sure we've got the most robust tank cars out on the network. And then there's response, which is making sure we're working with local communities and emergency responders to best address an incident that it does happen. And so we've taken numerous steps here in the past month or so to further those efforts. And certainly it's not the end of the journey by any stretch of the imagination, but when we identify some areas that we may have some gaps or we might need some additional steps, we're gonna address them, and we're not gonna wait around.
No, absolutely. And a lot has been addressed and covered, obviously, by the sector in the subsequent weeks following the East Palestine incident, to be certain. Let's move on to sort of regulatory issues, if you will, and specifically, I just wanted to talk about the issue of reciprocal switching. Do you think the Surface Transportation Board, Ian, will impose mandatory reciprocal switching and or other regulatory remedies supported by shippers? What's the sort of the current status of things at this point as it relates to that?
Well, it just so happens that the STB put out its latest quarterly report at the beginning of the week, and specifically on the reciprocal switching piece, I believe they listed next potential action as late summer. Forgive me if it was maybe July, August 2023 timeframe. And so obviously it remains an interest area. I know that there's been a lot of discussion around the appropriate data to use. If you think back to the reciprocal switching hearing last spring, the members really seemed to be interested in how switching might be used to address service challenges, things along those lines. And so, we'll keep a close eye on it and be prepared to engage. And obviously the board's had its hands full with a lot of different things. I think originally they had in one of their reports had said, next action would have been I think it was February of 23. So they're obviously taking a little more time, which I think is appropriate. If you're gonna really take on an issue of that level of import, you want to make sure you're getting it right, and that it's supported by the right metrics, the right data. And so, the chair, I think, is very diligent about how he approaches things. And I think he's also very diligent about making sure that, to the fullest extent possible, he has the other members comfortable with an approach. I give him a lot of credit for that. And so I would think that's kind of the path forward that they're charting here, and we'll see where it ends up. But we'll be prepared to play a productive role whenever the time is right.
Okay, got it. And then I just wanted to circle back to intermodal quickly, in terms of ways that the railroads could find a way to grow intermodal, their intermodal business units, that is, to make them more profitable, up against the headwinds that sort of are more in favor of motor carriers, perhaps like greater usage of East Coast ports, lower gas prices, things like that. What are some of the things that intermodal rail intermodal can do to sort of hedge against that and boost share?
Well, we hit on it a little earlier. It all
Yeah.
starts with service, right? So providing regular, predictable, high quality service that our customers deserve and expect. That's key number one. And I think really increasing visibility into shipments, really looking at how we might be able to shrink that distance that we become truck competitive. I think in some markets, some of the railroads have been really effective at driving that distance down to shorter levels than historically was generally accepted as a competitive distance.
Mhm.
And getting creative and really partnering with our intermodal partners, and partnering with ports, and being companies of yes. And I think the opportunity is there. The highways are not going to get any less congested. When you think about, we can move 200 or more trucks, the equivalent of 200 more truck containers on one train. That's a huge scale advantage. And it's all about keeping the network fluid. It's all about being good partners, and it's all about making it easy to do business with us. And I know that's what our executives are focused on.
Okay, great. And just to follow up on that, sort of separate but related, the West Coast port labor situation still remains unresolved. It's been quite some time now, if I'm not mistaken, going back to last spring or summer when the
Right.
original deal expired. How do you sort of view that, I guess, through the lens of freight rail slash intermodal, and what it sort of means? Obviously, this deal needs to get done sooner than later, as it's been so long. But what's the sort of position the AAR is taking on the matter at this time?
Well, certainly we and other stakeholders are eager to see a positive outcome. I give credit to both sides for certainly keeping a calm and cool demeanor in the public space. I think that's really important. But we dealt with a whole lot of different stakeholder groups last fall during our own labor negotiations, and stay in touch with those stakeholder groups. And I know folks are concerned, and there was a pretty big letter that went to the Department of Labor and other folks in the administration just last week from probably 100 different trade associations representing different industries, that really underscored the need for the administration to be engaged for a positive outcome, because we can't afford to have a slip up and have a slowdown or a strike out there, given the volume of goods that come through, given the national significance of the ports. And I look, I have the pleasure, in quotes, of having been through a pretty challenging labor round, and
Yeah.
I have faith that the parties are gonna find a path forward, and that everyone will end up in a workable spot, because I think it's just too important to not have that happen.
No, absolutely. So just one last quick one before we wrap up, Ian. I just was sort of curious. We're hearing a lot about onshoring, nearshoring, other forms of manufacturing, getting closer to home, more closer to North America, that is, in terms of well, in terms of whether it will be a significant or lasting trend, I guess is to be determined. But as we're starting to see a bit more evidence of it, what does that mean for freight rail in your opinion? Is that a boost or a benefit in any way, do you think?
I think it's a huge opportunity. Any sort of increase in domestic manufacturing, North American manufacturing, I think there's an opportunity for rail. We obviously have a lot of traffic moving both north and south, and of course through the ports as we've discussed. And I think, if I recall, we did a study a few years ago that said about 40% of our traffic is based on an international movement in some way, shape, or form. And whether it's north, south, east, west, we're poised to play a role. But I would be very encouraged at additional domestic manufacturing, and really on the industrial side, I think you're going to see a lot of that. If you hear some of the comments coming out of the chemical industry, for example, I think there's pretty big plans on that front. Certainly, the north-south North American trade flow we're going to benefit from, and there's obviously railroads that are moving across both the north and south borders. So look, I think it's an opportunity, and I know we would welcome the chance to compete for traffic based on that investment, and look forward to it.
Yeah, no, well said. Well, listen, Ian, this brings us to the end of our allotted time for today's podcast. So, on behalf of Logistics Management Magazine and the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, I'd like to say thanks for joining us. I believe I did look it up. This is officially your 5th visit with us.
All right, a savvy veteran at this point.
That's right. That's right. And for those of you listening in, if you want to give the Association of American Railroads a follow on Twitter, it's simply at AAR_freight rail, all one word there. And also, please feel free to give us a follow, simply at Logistics MGMT. Please feel free to go ahead and add us to your podcast list wherever you get your podcasts. Simply look for Supply Chain 24/7 and it'll pop right up. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.